real-world systems have been used widely to design games. Moreover, many games are inspired in one way or another by real-world systems, simulation games being the most representative of this. This is game design thinking, and on today's video, we are going to analyze the influence of the real-world systems on video games, and how using them can create games that are meaningful, engaging, and that develop skills that players can use outside the game's context. As always, remember that you can subscribe to our newsletter to receive a one-page PDF summary of the information on this video. Let's start. System thinking is intrinsically connected to game design, as almost every game includes some type of system in it, but not all games are considered systemic. Systemic games put system in a protagonist role, which allows the player to control and master them. This is why the first systemic video games ever made were simulations of real-world systems, putting the player in a godlike position in order to control and modify the different parts of the system of the game. Later technological advances, like the massification of the internet or a superior processing power, allowed game designers to implement complex economic systems that are heavily influenced by players' interaction, or the interactions of multiple systems from a third or first-person perspective. Another characteristic of games that borrow from real-world systems is that they don't have a predefined narrative. As it is in real life, you can plan and create a neat narrative for your life, but sometimes events unfold in ways that are controlled by systems that are outside our reach. For example, civilization games don't have a predefined narrative, even when they are based on historical figures. You are who decides if Saladin will crush his enemies with the sword, or will decide to do the full Elon Musk and travel to Mars. The narrative arises naturally from the gameplay decisions that the player made, which make them unique, but also potentially dull. In order to better understand systems and to avoid creating dull experiences, let's explore Michael Sellers' take on systems. According to Sellers, there are three major patterns that form systems. Economic patterns emulate the basic economic system, in which you earn some type of currency and, if well invested, you earn more of that currency. This also works backwards, so if a player makes a bad investment, it will be difficult to recover, generating what is known as the Matthew effect. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. In many strategy games, if the player doesn't play according to the metagame, for example using an underpowered combination or a bad opening sequence, they will have a hard time trying to win the game. Ecologic patterns can be seen in the typical predator-prey system. They balance their populations based on the scarcity or abundance of each other. Many games have tried to replicate ecologies, one of the most interesting cases being Ultima Online, and how players kill the virtual ecology in just a few hours. This happened because ecologies are stable only inside a certain range. After that, the ecology becomes brittle, and it runs the risk of never being in balance again. Finally, engines are combinations of economies and ecologies, but also other element systems known as converters and traders that take resources and convert them into others, or that allow to trade resources. This is where most of the interaction of the players occurs, and I think that's why Tynan Sylvester, designer of RimWorld, calls games engines of emotions. For example, an economy will keep reinforcing itself unless the player takes resources and uses them, usually to defeat the system or another player. The same happens with ecologies. They will remain stable unless players take resources from the ecologies and use them for their own advantage. This generates emotional responses on players, depending on the feedback received and also their level of mastery of the system. But systems can stir up emotions by themselves, taking into account not only the logical mechanical part of the system, but also the moral and emotional sides of it. To understand emotional systems, we have to reckon that games are strongly connected to human nature. They sprout naturally in humans and are one of the hallmarks of the first advanced civilizations. Games allow us to test skills in a safe environment where real-world consequences are minimal to non-existent, leaving out betting games and sports. Maybe because of this same trait is that game designers are exploring new ways to test not only skills but also moral limits. Train, Papers, Please, or This War of Mine, just to name a few, present choices to players in which the logical decision to win the game may confront the player with moral dilemmas. These are sometimes represented by the moral of the characters of the game, like characters in This War of Mine feeling bad for stealing to an old couple, but other games let the moral decision directly to players, like Papers, Please, in which you can separate families to comply with your orders or for a little extra money for your family, or you can also break the rules of the game in order to save a person or reunite a family, jeopardizing your family and potentially bringing your gameplay session to an early end. Now, there are certain strategies that you can follow to analyze systems from the real world and use them in your games. The first is a process known as abstraction. As Chris Crawford states, scientific simulations are based on precision, while game simulations are based on clarity. To know which elements to use in your game, you can analyze and represent its systems using diagrams, and then start to simplify or eliminate certain subsystems to represent just the ones that lead to the desired experience. In games that are heavily based on real-world systems like SimCity or Cities Skylines, many aspects of city planning and construction were completely removed because they didn't support the main experience. For example, streets are not closed where big construction takes place, nor they have to dig in order to build water pipes. There is definitely the potential to include those features in the game, but they will surely create distraction from the main experience instead of reinforcing it. One characteristic of systemic games is that they generate emergent behaviors. The interconnections between the different systems and the parts inside them generates behaviors from the bottom up instead of a central mastermind controlling and determining what will happen given a certain input. Highly interconnected systems allow players to use different strategies to overcome an obstacle, thus creating more meaningful aha moments when they discover a new strategy or a new way to use an old mechanic. For example, in most Total War campaigns, the player has to take into account many factors, like what to do with conquered cities, how to position their troops on the map and also in the battlefield. An apparent simple decision like pillaging a city instead of occupying it peacefully can destabilize the player's economy while also affecting his capacity to maintain his troops. Finally, when you start creating and implementing the systems in your game, don't forget to analyze and playtest them constantly to determine which systems are working and which aren't. Modifying systems could be a difficult task, but luckily, Donella Meadows, the author of Thinking in Systems, offered us a list on which elements, when modified, have a bigger impact on the systems. You can read the full list in the description below. Games have been largely used as a tool to acquire knowledge that can be transferred to the real world. The learning path could be indirect, but it could definitely make the player consider new ways to solve problems and to deal with everyday life. If we as game designers understand real-world systems, we can use them to create systems for our games, abstracting the necessary elements in order to create an interesting and meaningful experience. Moreover, if we really understand our systems, we can create systems that are more resilient, therefore allowing us to design better updates, DLCs, and new versions without breaking the system, presenting players with fresh content that respect their money and their time. The real world can be a source of inspiration if we start to look at it and analyze it from a systems perspective, using game design as a canvas to present players with better experiences that can create a better world. Thanks for watching the whole video. While you are here, remember to download your one-page PDF summary in the description below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the bell for more content like this. Thanks for watching.